Well, I am Professor Cyrus Satsas, and welcome today to today's lecture. We're going to be covering public relations and advertising. And as with most of my lectures, the content is primarily taken from the free textbook that most of you watching this probably already have. It's coming, and the content will primarily be coming from the two chapters in the textbook, again, covering the subject matters for today's lecture, which is PR and advertising. What I will try to add in the process is additional content pertaining to social media and digital technology. But again, this textbook really is fantastic. It is free. That's one of the best parts. And while slightly dated, the content is still incredibly relevant, and hopefully I will add to that to make the learning experience better. So there's going to be 2 PowerPoints for today's lecture. Let's get to the first one. And the first one will be public relations. So hopefully all of you are seeing my PowerPoint now on persuasive writing and public relations. So some key points for today's lecture include the definition of public relations, like what it is, some tasks that a PR practitioner takes on, the triangle, which is the fundamental approach to PR in terms of a campaign. I will not delve into what a SWOT analysis is, which is a fundamental part of PR that is for more advanced PR classes. This is just an introductory lecture covering 1 week. I'll review some basic persuasive writing techniques, cover the concepts of writing news releases, the inverted pyramid, which is a fundamental writing style for writing news releases. Not so much for social media because of how much shortened the content is there, dissecting news releases, and providing examples. So the definition of public relations, and this is taken out of the textbook, is that public relations helps an organization and its publics adapt mutually to each other. This is from the PRSA 1982 National Assembly. I actually don't know this from the textbook, actually, but regardless, that is the PRSA's definition. And for any students watching this, I strongly recommend, if you're interested in a career in PR, to join your local student chapter, which is PRSSA. The extra S is for student. I don't know if community colleges have PRSSA chapters, but universities certainly do. So if you are a community college student watching this and you end up transferring to a 4-year, again, I cannot emphasize enough, for anyone interested in a career in PR, joining your local PRSSA chapter at your local university is vitally important for achieving professional success, just because of all the networking you're going through, all the lessons they're teaching you. It is invaluable. So what are the tasks of a PR practitioner? Well, they advise management on policy, right? They talk to editors and reporters. That is a huge part of the role, is establishing relationships with media professionals so that hopefully the message you're trying to get out is actually disseminated from other media sources. When I was a professional journalist for a large number of years, I mean, I still am, but back when it was a full-time job instead of me now being a professor, I would routinely meet up socially with various PR practitioners and vice versa, just because I understood how important it was to get interviews and story ideas from them, and they understood how important it was to get their message out through me, given I had a platform. You might have to prepare publicity items. Some PR practitioners might have to hold press conferences. Writing feature articles might be a part of it. And then managing social media accounts is a huge part of it in this day and age. So my experience with social media professionally, besides the fact that I still am a media professional, I host 2 podcasts that are sports related in this day and age, sports related, I'm sorry. But I obviously have to use the social media channels and platforms to promote the podcast that I am producing. One of them is part of Tegna. They're a corporation that owns a significant amount of TV stations across the country. And they also own a podcast network called the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm a host there. Tegna was once a part of Gannett. Think of USA Today. They also own a lot of other news organizations. Gannett's split into 2 publicly traded companies, one of those being Tegna. Tegna is the broadcasting side of their news division, and then the print side maintains the name Gannett. So besides the work I do now in promoting that content through social media, because again, in this day and age, so much of the revenue that comes in from media organizations comes from clicks, comes from views. And regardless of the journalistic ethics that may or may not jive with that, that is the business model that a lot of organizations follow. And so you need to raise awareness. You need to get people actually clicking and viewing the content that you're producing, and you do so through social media. Some years ago, when I was a graduate student at San Diego State University, I was hired as a full-time social media manager for a fantastic nonprofit news organization called iNewsSource. They're a watchdog journalism group focused on government and big business, the powerful institutions that affect most of our lives, and reporting on them. And my role as a social media manager, similar to a social media manager for any company, was to raise awareness. In my case, raising awareness for the stories we were producing. And I'm going to share with you one tactic I did for them later on in this lecture today, which is vitally important. As a social media manager, you have to routinely produce reports on how all your platforms are doing, whether you're seeing growth, where your traffic sources are coming from, like demographics, geography, those all come into play, a lot of different variables there. You might have to write and make speeches. You might have to design posters and other forms of visuals. Visuals are vitally important in the world of PR. You might have to plan and produce exhibits, which kind of goes with the previous item. And you also might have to evaluate public relations programs. So the triangle I mentioned a moment ago, and you can see the triangle either as 3 angles or 3 sides, is composed obviously of 3 components. One of those being the message itself, right? Like, what are you trying to disseminate for people to see? The second side of the triangle, or the second angle, is the audience. Like, who are you trying to reach? Is it a broad audience? Is it a niche? Like, are you aiming specifically for, say, men or women? Are you aiming specifically for individuals aged 25 to 54, which is the prime demographic for advertisers? So that's what you have to figure out as well. The third part is the how. Like, what platforms do you plan on using to deliver the message? And where social media comes to play, and it has tremendous value, is in the sense of it's free. Now, just because an organization has their own social media platform does not mean that it's free advertising. You still need to get your word out there. So a lot of people advertise on social media. People can advertise through Google Ads. People can still go through traditional advertising platforms, which remain incredibly effective. And given the cost, that's explained so. And that includes television, radio, and print. So those are the 3 factors in when you're creating a public relations campaign in terms of what to consider, right? Like, what's the message itself? Who are we trying to send it to? How will we send it out? And that in return is your media campaign that you're producing, right? And you're developing strategies to get the audience to learn, retain, or act on your message over what could be a day, could be weeks, months, or even years. It entirely depends. So public relations writing is a form of persuasive writing where PR practitioners follow AP style. But the difference between a journalist and a PR practitioner is that with PR, you're being persuasive. You can use first person writing. You can be subjective and opinionated. You still want to be factually correct, but you are trying to persuade your audience to be involved in something. As I mentioned a moment ago, you're trying to get the audience either to learn something, to retain something, or to act on a message over a specific time period. So, and some tactics for making your writing persuasive, excuse me for one moment, includes being authoritative yet informative, letting your audience at least feel like you're an authority on the subject, and then providing information to substantiate that. You need to build a solid case, right? I mean, if you're trying to persuade someone of something, that includes actually backing up whatever your argument is with evidence. And really, evidence is a huge thing of it, but you need to build a solid case, a solid argument for why people should be either acting or listening to your campaign. The right tone of voice is important, right? Depending on who your audience is, maybe you want to be more aggressive. Maybe you want to take a step back and bring a very soft approach. Using influential words is important. And one of the best examples of that could be sales, right? Going at a business sale. Those are persuasive action words, right? Or for the environment, you might want to emphasize the dire circumstances of whatever your campaign is in that regard. So influential words are important there. And that's especially true for social media campaigns where the verbiage is incredibly limited. Twitter, for example, you have 280 characters. Facebook, even though you have a much larger scale, research has showed that the most effective number of characters for a Facebook post is only 80. That's a really minimal amount of words. So you need to be short and very sweet. And the same applies for Instagram as well, where you need to be very short and to the point. Be repetitive. This is a tactic especially followed by politicians, right? One particular politician who is no longer in the White House was incredibly effective at this, where regardless of whether or not the words that are being disseminated are true, by simply repeating them, that is a psychological tactic where people will start to believe the words if they are repeated over and over again, regardless of whether it is factually correct. Human beings are flawed, and this is one clear example of that. You want to be specific and provide examples, right? And this goes to building a solid case. Exclusivity is vitally important. And to give an example of this, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, followed this tactic completely in building his Facebook empire. Facebook started first on the campus of Harvard. So you had to be a Harvard student to be a member of Facebook. Eventually, the Facebook platform spread to other colleges and universities. And so the only way you could have been a member on Facebook was if you had a .edu email address. And so everyone who didn't have a .edu email address was suddenly clamoring to get in because they weren't part of what was this new thing that was growing called Facebook. So the exclusivity was there and it made it very appealing, right? Human beings, again, I just mentioned a moment ago, we are flawed and we love things that we can't have. It is so sad, yet so true. So Facebook, as they continue rolling out, they will only let college students in. So then they changed it and they made it where you no longer needed a .edu email address to register, but you had to be invited to be a member on Facebook. So you had people searching everywhere to try to find someone else who was a member of Facebook so that they could be invited to join in as well. And this level of exclusivity through all this, the process of growth led Facebook to where it is now. And you see this with a lot of campaigns where, time's running out, only a limited supply, and these are also persuasive action words. So exclusivity is a vitally effective form of persuasive writing. And this especially applies to social media, given the brevity of how many words you can typically use from the major platforms. So press releases, right? Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read one. If you ever become a media professional, either you're going to be writing a lot of these or you're going to be consuming a lot of these. Journalists use press releases oftentimes for story ideas. PR practitioners write press releases to get the word out, to disseminate information. And press releases can be announcements of new initiatives or programs, right? Let's say the company you're working for, you're doing PR for has announced that they're expanding their corporate headquarters. Maybe you need to write a press release about that. It could be beginnings and endings. Let's say a campaign is going to launch on a certain date and it ends on a certain date, and you have to announce that, right? It could be the announcement of new leadership or old leadership. Like, for example, a new CEO of a company is coming in. You might have to write a press release about that. Special events, right? Let's say you're writing a press release on a social gathering or on a concert. So you might have to create a press release about that. It might be a tie into an existing issue or concern in your community. And that depends entirely on what your community is and where you are. But events routinely happen, and it could be a government agency, it could be a private entity, but you might have to write a press release based on that issue or concern in the community. It could be a special testimonial or endorsement. Let's say you get someone high profile who is vouching for the campaign that you're trying to raise awareness for. You might want to write a press release to include attributions from them. Or it just could be something unique or unusual, and you could write the press release based on that if it's appealing. So a big part of the PR practitioner's job, again, is writing these news releases and publishing social media content. Sometimes you only are publishing social media content. Sometimes you're just writing news releases. Sometimes they go hand in hand, where you write a news release, then you're publishing a social media version of that that's typically shorter or maybe more heavily based on visuals. And again, writing effective news releases and social media content that will get attention is key. And that's where what we talked about just a moment ago. You use some of those tools to help you out there. You want to identify what the news is that you're actually sharing, right? I mentioned AP style a moment ago. That is a form of writing, which is, again, followed by both journalists and PR practitioners. GSP, that is journalism jargon. It stands for grammar, spelling, punctuation. That is vitally important. That is why college students are a lot of the emphasis on their curriculum is writing classes, because the better you are as a writer, the better communicator you are. You come off as more professional. You come off as an expert, much more so if your content looks professional and is clean and doesn't have grammatical, spelling, and punctuation errors. Nearly all the media that you consume that is written, hopefully you've noticed, lacks grammatical errors, lacks spelling errors, lacks punctuation errors. This adds professionalism. This adds credibility. If someone was disseminating content that had very poor writing in it, chances are you're not going to trust it. Chances are you'll laugh it off and not take it seriously. So make sure your writing in your prose is clean. And be informed, right? Know the structure of a newsroom. So if you're a PR practitioner, either be aware of your target media that you're going to be aiming all your content for. And this is where I'm going to bring it back to my experience as the social media manager for iNewsSource. One of my tasks was creating a massive spreadsheet of every organization and every journalist and media professional in the market, in this case, San Diego. That was our target geographic demographic, that could possibly help in either spreading the message or their individuals that we wanted the message to get to directly. And so, and this is where, and I want to show you actually this tactic real quick. When it comes to Twitter, so let me go back to my browser real quick here. This is a great tactic for spreading, for trying to get your word out there. So let's say you're the social media manager for an organization, and the time comes for you to, where you have to actually like raise awareness for specific content that you want other people to notice. One important tactic, and one thing I did, is I had this spreadsheet, again, of hundreds of media professionals and organizations that I routinely wanted to be aware of all the news stories we were publishing. So what I would do is I tweet out an average of 20 to 25 tweets a day to each individual, because I knew that everybody that I tweeted at, just by including their handle in there, right? Like you just put that @ symbol. And we'll use one of my journalist friends as an example here. Let's say I wanted to get my message out to my friend Conor Letourneau. He's a journalist with the San Francisco Chronicle. If you put a period in front of your tweet, everything you write after this, everything I write here following that period will show up on my newsfeed. You don't want to do this if you're going to be sending 20 to 25 tweets out a day that all have the exact same message, because you don't want to annoy your audience, right? So if you take this period out and you just start your tweet with the @ symbol, Twitter recognizes this as a reply. And so what I would do is I would do 20 to 25 tweets like this. The content following the account, the Twitter handle, was usually the same, but I would change the actual account each time to someone different. And the purpose of this is because just by using that @ symbol, you're tagging the person, you're making them aware. They're going to get a notification that you wrote something about them. You're raising awareness just by using this @ symbol and following that with the account that you want to bring attention to. And by starting my tweet with the @ symbol, I was not flooding my news feed. And just giving, in case people aren't familiar with the term newsfeed means, just your general homepage where you have all people you're following's content that goes on there. So again, by starting my tweet with the @ symbol, I'm not flooding my news feed and annoying other people. But if you ever want to publish a tweet with an at symbol, but you want other people to see it as well, that is why you oftentimes see a period in front, because if I tweet with that period first, and then I tweeted this out, everyone would see the tweet instead of if I take the period out, now it just becomes a reply. So as part of my marketing campaigns as a social media manager, I would send on average with every news story 20 to 25 tweets a day. And back then the stories were really investigative. And so we only published like 2 or 3 stories a day. So I'd spread out the campaign over 3 or 4 days at a time. If you're working for a company that is constantly churning stories, you might have a lot of different lists. You might have a lot of different spreadsheets depending on the beat that you're aiming for. When I say beat, that's a journalism jargon term for topic, right? So let's say you have a health story. Well, I might have one spreadsheet full of all the contacts, whether it's organizations or individuals in the field, and maybe media professionals as well who are covering this, that I would send tweets out to. And one of the beautiful things of Twitter, and the reason why Twitter is so much more popular than nearly all other social media platforms when it comes to marketing, is because the content is permanent and you can put hyperlinks in there. It's much easier to spread the information to others. So now let me go back to the PowerPoint. So you want to know the structure of the newsroom, or you want to be aware, depending on demographics, your target demographics, of who you want this message to go to, and send your messages to them. Understand deadlines, right? So here's another a very important piece of information. So if you decide you have something big you want to announce, I've opened businesses previously. I've launched numerous media programs in the past. So I've had to write a lot of press releases. The best day to send out a press release, either through email to media organizations and individuals, or through social media, is Tuesday, preferably early Tuesday. The reason for that is because if you send out information on a Monday, it could get lost. People are usually back starting work after a weekend. Their email box is filled up. They might be tired. They just might not be that into work for the day. And if you do it later in the week, like the worst day to send out information is Friday. So if you ever see a politician, if you ever see an organization publish negative news about themselves, or news that will be negative in the grand scheme of things, you will notice that they always publish it on Fridays, because news is often lost. People are focused on the weekend. People are distracted with what's to come, and they're not focused so much on what's in front of them work-wise. So Tuesday is the most optimal day for releasing news that you're hoping will raise awareness and attention, followed by Wednesday and then Thursday. Actually, I don't know if Thursday is like third. I don't know if Monday or Thursday would be better, but Tuesday and Wednesday are the best days. Make sure you establish rapport. I talked a moment ago, back when I was a full-time journalist, how often I'd meet up with PR practitioners and socialize with them. That rapport, that networking is vitally important. And it doesn't have to be face-to-face. In our current landscape, just make contact routinely through digital devices, right? Just simple messages. Hello, introduce yourself. Make sure you know the correct writing style for the publication you're submitting the release to, and know how to distribute the release, right? And that's where social media plays a part in this as well. But obviously knowing who to email it to, marketing tactics are important. I just talked a moment ago about one of them I used to use. And the inverted pyramid is important to know, just because this is the writing style that PR practitioners use when they write actual press releases, where the most important information is first, because you want to hook your reader in, right? If you start your story off with the least important information, or your release in this case, the person might not read the rest of it because you're starting it off with the least interesting content, right? So you want to hook your reader in through what's called a tease. And with social media, this is especially important, because instead of writing a whole press release where you start with the most important information and finish the least, thus an inverted pyramid, you're pretty much just making your social media content with the most important information, and that's it. So whatever your lead is, the lead is your first sentence / paragraph of a press release or a news story. Your lead will be your entire social media content in this case, right? And you want to focus on the most important information you need to get across. You want to get people excited about the news you have to share. And this goes back to the persuasive writing techniques we talked about. If you write a full news release, don't make it long. You never want it to be, definitely no longer than 2 pages. I always emphasize 1 page. as being the max for a news release. You want to write clear. You want to avoid jargon because you never really know who you're targeting, right? You want to summarize who you are in the organization you work for and what the press release is about at the top, so people understand what is to come. And visuals, again, are vitally important. This includes maps, videos, infographics, etc. And avoid adjectives and superlatives both in your social media content and in your news release. And for media professionals, news releases, again, give you story ideas. That's where a lot of ideas come from. And as you consume that content, you want to find maybe hidden angles in there. So even the press release itself might not be your story idea, but something within it could be. It just depends on how interesting it is and how much impacts the world around you. And these are just some other tips for dissecting a news release. Let's say you write one yourself. These are just some tips, like review the top of the release, make sure your contact information is there, make sure all the facts are correct, correct AP style violations, dig for additional information if it's not answered in the release. Contact a person on the release for more information. And that includes social media. You can direct message with most platforms. With Instagram, I think you can direct message anyone with Instagram. With Twitter, people have to have their DMs open and available. I book a lot of guests on a side note through social media now because it's the easiest way to find people. And do your research and aim for the highest quality product to produce. And this is just a checklist of everything that goes into a press release. Obviously, this doesn't apply as much for social media content, but certainly for a news release, if you decide to write it, just follow all of these. And it's obviously important, of course, in this day and age to include your social media channels in any press release because people are going to their mobile devices and going to the social media apps to get their information. So it's vitally important. And the pound symbols, these 3 pounds, represents the end of a news release, if you ever see that. So now I'm going to be going to the other PowerPoint to talk real quickly about advertising. So why don't we now go to that? So advertising is obviously a little different. All right, let me see if I can figure out how I can get, my mouse is hidden right now. Might have to stop sharing for a second. Okay. Oh, you have to see me for just a brief moment. I apologize. All right, so now let's get this advertising PowerPoint back. All right, so now hopefully, there we go. All right, so some key points from this part of the lecture. What is advertising? Some tasks in advertising, advertising writing, steps to making an ad. There's a checklist that you should follow, and some examples. So what is advertising? Advertising is defined as a form of communication that persuades the public to take action in regards to a product, service, idea, etc. Advertising consists of account management. You have to have someone actually who's representing the advertising firm, maybe, communicating with the clients. They usually manage the client's advertising account, the strategy, the plan, its implementation. Then there's a creative side. They actually develop and design the ads. And then there's a research department, and that's really where the value comes in terms of information and marketing, understanding like who the people are out there, who your advertisement should be targeted for, identifying trends and patterns in the market which change routinely, identifying potential customers, your competition. There's a lot to research when it comes to advertising. And then there's the media planners, right? These are placements of the ad with the appropriate media. And this used to be TV, online, print, radio, but social media has become huge in this simply because of how specific you can gear your ads toward. So with advertising writing, you want to communicate the most in the fewest amount of words, right? And that's especially applicable for social media content. And this is where visuals are very strong, right? You want to be clear. You want to refrain from using jargon. Again, you don't want to isolate and alienate certain groups by using language that is only relatable and understandable to a small sect of the overall population. Placement of text and visuals is totally key. Attention-grabbing text brings a reader into the ad. And this is what's very challenging, yet what makes your advertisement incredibly effective. Your ad must create an emotional connection with the reader. So how to write an advertisement? Do your homework, obviously, investigate the landscape and competition, and know who your audience is and why they would care about the product. And that's one of the hardest parts of making an advertisement, making them care about it. If you can do that, you're well on your way to being a very successful advertising professional. And use a conversational tone, make it relatable. Now, a call for action is normally needed. You always want to make sure whether your ad is placed in a legacy media format or maybe a social media format, that there's a way for them to contact you. There's a way for them to actually get more information. That's where hyperlinks are important. Maybe phone numbers are not a popular thing these days, but websites remain so. Maybe there's an application you want people to check out. You want to identify the benefit of your product and service, and you want to identify the features and characteristics of the product service that make it unique from others. So the first steps toward making a positive advertising campaign: description. You want it to be descriptive. You want it to have a purpose. You need to include a price. Almost everything costs something, right? You need to include the features, the benefits. Again, this goes back to why people should care, right? What are the benefits? Guarantees are always huge. It's very effective for advertising if you offer guarantees. It gives people a sense of security and reassurance. You might want to include an offer in there. Deadlines are important. That kind of fits in with the exclusivity angle from PR, right? If there's a deadline, people suddenly have an urgency. Method of payment is important, right? In this day and age, there's a lot of different ones. You could even potentially collect from crypto or some sort of Bitcoin, or obviously, the PayPals and Venmos, and then there's all the traditional formats, whether it's credit cards and maybe even cash. There's also methods of ordering. Step 2, you want to write a headline to draw the reader in. And this headline is especially effective for social media ads. It needs to be direct. Could be news related, might be a how-to, might ask a question, it might be commanding, and that's where you sound authoritative. It might be informative, or it could be a testimonial where you have someone who's high profile endorsing the product, right? And sometimes you might have to write secondary headlines if necessary. But again, for social media ads, especially where the content is so limited and there's just such little space, this is very important. And step 3, write body copy that goes back to the main content you wrote earlier about. Again, visuals are very important in advertising. And edit yourself. Go back and see if your headline, subheadline, the body copy makes sense. Is it clear? Does it flow well? Is there information missing? Maybe you put too much information and it's wordy. And then step 4 is the 5-second test. You show the ad to a few people for 5 seconds and see what they think about the ad. If they think negatively about it, review the ad and think of all the negatives with the ad. You can play devil's advocate just to find all those negatives, right? And then from there, consider if you could tell the story in another way. And that's it. So that concludes today's presentation on the introductory level of PR and advertising, with a lot of social media applicability in there. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me at any point, especially if you're a student watching this, and hope this was educational and informative for you. Thank you very much.